The rain came down in sheets so thick that Natalie Brooks could barely see 5 feet beyond her windshield. Her fingers gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white as she navigated the winding lakeside road. This was supposed to be a simple drive back to the city after photographing the Henderson wedding, but nature had other plans. Thunder cracked overhead, so loud and sudden that Natalie jumped in her seat. Her small sedan swerved slightly before she corrected course, her heart hammering against her ribs. The GPS on her phone had stopped working 20 minutes ago, leaving her alone on this unfamiliar stretch of road with nothing but instinct to guide her. She was 27 years old, had built a successful wedding photography business from nothing, and had driven through countless difficult situations. But this storm felt different. Dangerous. Personal, somehow. Another flash of lightning illuminated the landscape, and Natalie caught a glimpse of massive trees bending under the wind's assault. Branches littered the road ahead, forcing her to slow to a crawl. That's when she heard it. A grinding, mechanical sound coming from beneath her car's hood, followed by a spluttering cough as the engine began to fail. "No, no, no," Natalie whispered, pressing harder on the gas pedal. The car lurched forward another 100 feet before dying completely, rolling to a stop on the shoulder of the road. She sat there for a moment, listening to the rain drum against the roof, trying to process what had just happened. Her phone showed no signal. The road was completely empty. And according to the last road sign she'd seen, the nearest town was at least 15 miles behind her. Natalie grabbed her emergency flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped out into the storm. Within seconds, she was soaked to the bone, her dark hair plastered against her face. She popped the hood, but even with the flashlight, she couldn't see anything obviously wrong. Not that she would know what to look for anyway. An impossible choice. Standing in the pouring rain beside her dead car, Natalie felt panic beginning to claw at her chest. She could stay here and hope someone drove by, which seemed unlikely given the storm's intensity. Or she could start walking, though she had no idea where she was going or how far the next house might be. Then she saw it. Through the sheets of rain and the darkness, a light flickered in the distance. Not a streetlight or passing car, but something steady and warm. A house, maybe. Hope surged through her chest. Natalie locked her car, slung her camera bag over her shoulder, and started walking toward the light. Every step felt like fighting against an invisible wall as the wind pushed her backward. Her soaked clothes clung to her body, and she could feel her teeth beginning to chatter. But she kept moving, focused on that distant light like a lighthouse beacon. The walk felt endless. Her legs burned with effort, and her lungs ached from the cold rain. Just when she thought she might collapse right there on the road, the light grew brighter, closer. A long driveway appeared on her left, flanked by tall iron gates that stood open as if waiting for her. Through the downpour, she could make out an enormous house. Not a house, actually. A mansion. All stone and glass and modern angles, sitting on a hill overlooking the lake. Warm light glowed from several windows, promising shelter and safety. Natalie stumbled up the driveway, her shoes squelching with each step. By the time she reached the massive front door, she was shaking so badly she could barely lift her hand to knock. When she finally managed it, the sound seemed pathetically small against the storm's roar. Nothing happened. She knocked again, harder this time, using her fist. Still nothing. Fresh panic washed over her. What if no one was home? What if the lights were on timers? She'd used the last of her strength to get here, and she wasn't sure she could make it anywhere else. Natalie was about to try knocking one more time when the door suddenly swung open. A man stood there, silhouetted against the warm light from inside. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair slightly mussed as if he'd been running his hands through it. He wore dark jeans and a simple gray sweater, and he was staring at her with an expression somewhere between shock and concern. "Please," Natalie managed through chattering teeth. "My car broke down. I need help." For a long moment, the man just stared at her, and Natalie felt a flash of fear. She was alone, miles from anywhere, asking a complete stranger for help. But then his expression shifted, becoming almost gentle. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. His voice was deep and cultured, with the kind of careful enunciation that spoke of expensive education. "You're going to freeze to death out there." Natalie didn't need to be told twice. She stepped into the entrance hall, immediately aware that she was dripping water all over what looked like very expensive marble flooring. The warmth of the house hit her like a physical thing, and she couldn't stop the small sound of relief that escaped her throat. The man closed the door against the storm's fury, and the sudden quiet felt almost disorienting. He turned to look at her properly, and Natalie found herself meeting a pair of striking gray eyes that seemed to take in everything about her in a single glance. "Julian Mercer," he said simply, not offering his hand since hers were still clutching her camera bag. "And you look like you've had a terrible night." "Natalie Brooks," she replied, trying to stop her teeth from chattering long enough to speak clearly. "I'm so sorry to intrude like this. My car died about half a mile down the road, and yours was the only light I could see." Julian nodded, already moving toward what looked like a closet near the entrance. He pulled out a thick, soft towel and handed it to her. "Don't apologize. That storm is dangerous. You did the right thing seeking shelter." Natalie wrapped the towel around herself, grateful for even this small bit of warmth. Now that she was inside and the immediate panic had faded, she could take in her surroundings properly. The entrance hall alone was bigger than her entire apartment. Modern art hung on the walls, and through an archway she could see a living room with floor-to-ceiling windows that probably offered an incredible view of the lake during the day. "This house is beautiful," she said without thinking, then felt her cheeks flush. "Sorry. That was random." "Thank you," Julian said, and she thought she detected a hint of amusement in his voice. "I designed it myself." He gestured toward the living room. "Come sit by the fire. You need to warm up properly, and then we can figure out what to do about your car." Natalie followed him through the archway, her wet shoes squeaking embarrassingly on the hardwood floors. The living room was stunning. Minimalist but warm, with comfortable-looking furniture arranged around a massive stone fireplace where a fire crackled invitingly. The windows Julian had mentioned were currently dark mirrors reflecting the room back at them, rain streaming down the glass in rivulets. She sat in a chair near the fire, close enough to feel its heat but not so close that she'd steam like a kettle. Julian disappeared for a moment and returned with another towel and what looked like a gray sweatshirt. "The bathroom is just down that hall," he said, pointing. "You should change out of those wet clothes before you catch pneumonia. That sweatshirt should fit well enough." Natalie took the offered items, touched by his thoughtfulness. "Thank you. Really. You're being incredibly kind to a stranger who just showed up at your door." Something flickered across Julian's face. An emotion she couldn't quite read. "We all need help sometimes," he said quietly. "I just happened to be in a position to offer it tonight." Questions without answers. When Natalie emerged from the bathroom a few minutes later, wearing Julian's oversized sweatshirt over her still damp jeans, she felt almost human again. The sweatshirt smelled faintly of cedar and something else she couldn't identify. Something masculine and somehow comforting. Julian was standing by the windows, looking out at the storm with his hands in his pockets. He turned when he heard her approach, and Natalie saw him take in her appearance with those careful gray eyes. "Better?" he asked. "Much. Thank you." She gestured to the sweatshirt. "I'll wash this and get it back to you once I figure out my car situation." "Keep it," Julian said with a slight wave of his hand. "I have plenty." An awkward silence settled between them. Natalie found herself studying him more carefully now that the immediate crisis had passed. He looked to be in his mid-30s, with sharp features that might have been intimidating if not for the slight softness around his eyes. There was something about him that suggested he wasn't used to having guests. The way he stood, the careful distance he maintained, all of it spoke of someone who'd grown accustomed to solitude. "I should try calling for a tow truck," Natalie said, pulling out her phone. "Do you have Wi-Fi?" "I still don't have any signal." "The storm knocked out the cell towers about an hour ago," Julian replied. "And my landline went dead shortly after that. I'm afraid we're completely cut off until the weather clears." Natalie's stomach dropped. "How long do these storms usually last?" "Could be hours. Could be all night." Julian moved away from the windows and sat in the chair across from hers. The weather service was predicting severe conditions through tomorrow morning at least. Tomorrow morning. Natalie processed this, trying not to panic. She was trapped here, in this beautiful house, with a man she'd known for all of 20 minutes. As if reading her mind, Julian leaned forward slightly. "I know this is an uncomfortable situation," he said carefully. "A strange man in an isolated house during a storm. If it makes you feel any better, I'm a software developer, not a serial killer. And there are 6 guest rooms upstairs. You're welcome to lock yourself in one if that would make you feel safer." The honesty in his voice surprised her. Most people would have been offended by the implication, but Julian seemed to understand her position perfectly. "I appreciate that," Natalie said softly. "But I don't think that's necessary. You've been nothing but kind." She paused. "A software developer who designed his own house and lives alone on a lake. That's an interesting combination." Julian's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I suppose it is. I prefer solitude. Cities are too loud, too chaotic. Out here, I can work without interruption. Must be lonely sometimes though." The words were out before Natalie could stop them, and she immediately wished she could take them back. But Julian didn't seem offended. Instead, he looked at her with those penetrating gray eyes and said something that made her breath catch. "Loneliness is safer than disappointment. I learned that lesson the hard way." The fire crackled softly, filling the silence that had settled between them after Julian's confession. Natalie studied him across the flickering light, seeing past his careful composure to something deeper. "Pain, maybe. Or regret." "That sounds like someone hurt you badly," she said gently, surprising herself with her boldness. But something about being trapped in this storm, cut off from the rest of the world, made normal social boundaries feel less important. Julian leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Natalie thought he might shut down the conversation entirely. But then he spoke, his voice carrying a weight that suggested he didn't talk about this often. "Her name was Victoria. We met in college, got engaged right after graduation. I thought we were building a life together." He paused, staring into the fire. "Turns out she was more interested in the life my family's money could provide. When I decided to step away from the family business to start my own company, she left. Said I was throwing away our future for a foolish dream." Natalie felt her heart constrict. "I'm sorry. That must have been devastating." "It was educational," Julian corrected, though his tone suggested otherwise. "I learned that most people only stay as long as you're useful to them. Once I came out here, built this house, focused on my work, life became much simpler. No expectations to manage, no one to disappoint." "That's not living though," Natalie said before she could stop herself. "That's just existing in a really nice cage." Julian's eyes snapped to hers, and for a moment she saw something flash across his face. Anger, perhaps, or recognition. But then his expression softened slightly. "And what about you?" he asked, neatly turning the conversation away from himself. "What's your story, Natalie Brooks? Besides being a photographer who drives into deadly storms?" Natalie laughed, a sound that felt strange in the quiet house. "Wedding photographer, specifically. I capture people's happiest moments for a living, which is ironic considering my own track record with relationships." "How so?" She shifted in her chair, pulling her knees up under Julian's oversized sweatshirt. I spent 3 years with someone who I thought was my person. Thomas. We lived together, talked about marriage, the whole thing. Then one day I came home early from a shoot and found him packing his stuff. He said he'd met someone else, that he'd been unhappy for months but didn't know how to tell me. Julian was watching her intently now, and Natalie found it surprisingly easy to continue. The worst part wasn't even the cheating or the lying. It was realizing that I'd been so focused on my business, on capturing everyone else's love stories, that I'd completely missed the fact that my own relationship was falling apart. I photographed 12 weddings in the month before he left. 12 celebrations of eternal love. And I had no idea my own was already over. That wasn't your fault, Julian said firmly. He made the choice to be dishonest. Maybe. But it made me question everything. Made me wonder if I'm even capable of recognizing real connection when I see it. I spend my days arranging people into perfect poses, capturing perfect moments. But none of it's real. It's all performance. When the lights go out. As if the universe wanted to emphasize her point, the lights suddenly flickered. Once, twice, then died completely. The only illumination came from the fire, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Well, Julian said dryly, that's inconvenient. Natalie heard him stand and move through the darkness with surprising confidence. Drawers opened and closed, and then a flashlight clicked on, its beam cutting through the gloom. The backup generator should kick in any moment, he said, but his voice carried a note of uncertainty. They waited. Nothing happened. Or not, Julian muttered. Stay here. I need to check the generator in the basement. I'm coming with you, Natalie said quickly, standing up. The thought of being alone in this dark, unfamiliar house while the storm raged outside suddenly felt unbearable. Julian turned the flashlight toward her, and she saw his expression soften. All right. But stay close. This house has a lot of stairs. They made their way through the darkened mansion, Julian's flashlight creating a small circle of safety in the overwhelming darkness. Natalie stayed right behind him, close enough that she could smell that cedar scent from his sweatshirt, could feel the warmth radiating from his body. The basement stairs were steep and narrow, nothing like the grand staircase in the main part of the house. Julian went first, testing each step carefully before allowing Natalie to follow. At the bottom, they found themselves in a surprisingly modern utility room dominated by a large generator. Julian examined it with the flashlight, his brow furrowed in concentration. The fuel line is fine. The connections look good. But it's not responding to the automatic switch. Can you start it manually? Natalie asked, hovering near his shoulder. Maybe. If I can figure out what's wrong. He handed her the flashlight. Hold this steady while I check the control panel. Natalie aimed the beam where he indicated, watching as Julian's capable hands moved over the machinery with practiced ease. She found herself noticing details she'd missed before. The way his hair fell forward over his forehead when he concentrated. The small scar on his left hand. The surprising gentleness in his movements despite his obvious frustration. There, he said suddenly. One of the breakers got tripped by the power surge. Should be an easy fix. He flipped the breaker, and the generator rumbled to life with a deep, reassuring hum. But the lights didn't come back on. Julian straightened, running a hand through his hair in frustration. The generator is working, but the house wiring must have been damaged by lightning. We're going to be dependent on the fire and whatever flashlights I can find. Truth in the darkness. They made their way back upstairs, and Julian gathered every candle he could find in the house. Soon the living room was transformed into something almost magical. Dozens of candles flickered on every surface, their warm glow far more intimate than the electric lights had been. Natalie settled back into her chair by the fire, watching Julian move around the room with quiet efficiency. He'd relaxed slightly since their conversation earlier, as if sharing his story had loosened something inside him. "Are you hungry?" he asked, pausing near the kitchen doorway. "I can make us something that doesn't require electricity." "Starving, actually," Natalie admitted. She'd been so focused on getting back to the city that she'd skipped dinner after the wedding. Julian disappeared into the kitchen and returned several minutes later with a tray containing bread, cheese, fruit, and 2 glasses of red wine. He set it on the low table between their chairs. "Not exactly gourmet," he said, settling back into his seat. "But it should hold us over until morning." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the storm continuing its assault on the windows. But inside this circle of candlelight and firelight, Natalie felt strangely safe. Protected, even. "Can I ask you something?" Julian said suddenly, breaking the quiet. "Of course. Earlier, you said you wondered if you're capable of recognizing real connection. Do you really believe that? Because from where I'm sitting, you seem like someone who sees people very clearly." Natalie took a sip of wine, considering her answer. "I see what people want me to see. That's different from seeing who they really are. Thomas wanted me to see a devoted partner, so that's what I saw. Until the illusion shattered." "Maybe the problem wasn't your perception," Julian suggested. "Maybe it was his deception. You can't blame yourself for trusting someone who deliberately misled you." "That's very rational," Natalie said with a slight smile. "But feelings aren't rational, are they? I still feel like I should have known. Like I should have seen the signs." Julian leaned forward, his gray eyes intense in the candlelight. "Natalie, the ability to trust people isn't a weakness. It's actually incredibly brave. Much braver than building walls and hiding behind them." "Is that what you think you're doing? Hiding?" "I know I am," he said simply. "After Victoria left, I told myself I was choosing solitude. Being smart, protecting myself. But lately I've been wondering if I'm just a coward who's too afraid to risk being hurt again." The honesty in his voice took Natalie's breath away. This successful, brilliant man who'd built an empire and a stunning home was sitting here admitting his deepest fear to a woman he'd known for less than 3 hours. "You're not a coward," she said softly. "You let me in tonight. A complete stranger in the middle of a storm. That took courage. Did it? Or was it just common decency?" "Julian, most people wouldn't have opened their door. Especially not someone who values their privacy and solitude as much as you clearly do. You could have pretended not to be home. Could have turned me away. But you didn't." The space between. Thunder rumbled overhead, but it sounded more distant now. The worst of the storm seemed to be passing, though rain still fell steadily against the windows. Julian stood and moved to one of the large windows, staring out at the darkness. Natalie joined him, standing close enough that their reflections merged slightly in the glass. "I haven't had anyone in this house since it was finished 2 years ago," Julian said quietly. "I told myself it was because I was busy, because I valued my privacy. But the truth is I was afraid. Afraid of letting someone see how empty my life has become." Natalie turned to look at him, seeing the vulnerability written across his features. "It's not empty. You've built something amazing here. You've created work that matters, a home that's beautiful. That's more than most people accomplish. But I've done it all alone. And tonight, having you here, talking to you, it's made me realize how much I've been missing." He turned to face her fully, and Natalie's breath caught at the raw emotion in his eyes. "I've been so focused on protecting myself from being hurt again that I forgot what it feels like to actually connect with someone." Natalie felt her heart racing. They were standing so close now, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, could count the faint freckles across his nose that she'd missed before. "I feel it too," she whispered. "This connection. I know it's fast and probably crazy, but I feel like I've known you longer than a few hours." Julian reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of still damp hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek, and Natalie felt her whole body respond to the gentle touch. "What are we doing?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "You're going to leave when the storm ends. Go back to your life, your business. This is just a moment out of time." "Maybe that's what makes it safe," Natalie said, though her heart protested the words. "No expectations, no pressure. Just two people being honest with each other for one night." "I don't want it to be just one night," Julian admitted. "And that terrifies me." Natalie lifted her hand to cover his where it still rested against her cheek. "It terrifies me too. But maybe being terrified means it matters. Maybe it means it's real." The candlelight flickered around them, casting their shadows long across the walls. Outside, the storm continued, but inside this moment, Natalie felt something shift. Some fundamental understanding passing between them without words. Julian's other hand came up to cup her face, his thumbs gently tracing the line of her jaw. "I want to kiss you," he said softly. "But I need you to know that if I do, everything changes. I won't be able to pretend this didn't happen. Won't be able to go back to my careful, controlled life like nothing matters." "Good," Natalie breathed. "I don't want you to go back to that life. And I don't want to go back to mine, pretending I'm fine with being alone because it's easier than risking my heart again." Julian leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind, to step back, to protect herself. But Natalie didn't move away. Instead, she rose on her toes to meet him halfway. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if they were both afraid of breaking something fragile. But then Julian's arms came around her waist, pulling her closer, and Natalie's hands found their way into his hair. The kiss deepened, filled with all the loneliness and longing they'd both been carrying for too long. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Julian rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he whispered. "Not just tonight. Stay and let's figure this out together." Natalie's eyes filled with tears, overwhelmed by the intensity of what she was feeling. "I don't even know if this is real or if we're just two lonely people caught up in the moment." "Then let's find out," Julian said, pulling back to look into her eyes. "Let's take the risk. Let's see if this connection we feel is as real tomorrow morning as it feels right now." Outside, lightning flashed one more time, illuminating the room in stark white light. And in that moment, Natalie made a decision that would change everything. Natalie woke to the sound of birdsong and soft sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows. For a moment, she was disoriented, wrapped in warmth and comfort that felt foreign. Then the memories of the previous night came flooding back. The storm, the broken car, Julian. She turned her head and found him still asleep beside her, his face relaxed in a way she hadn't seen while he was awake. They'd spent hours talking after that kiss, sitting close on the couch, sharing stories and dreams and fears until exhaustion finally claimed them both. Julian had insisted she take the master bedroom while he took the guest room, but somewhere around 3 a.m, unable to sleep alone in the too quiet house, she'd found him sitting by his window watching the storm. He'd simply opened his arms, and she'd curled against his chest, finally feeling safe enough to rest. Now, in the gentle morning light, everything felt different. The intensity of the storm had passed, replaced by a crystalline clarity that made Natalie's chest tighten with uncertainty. Last night had felt like existing outside of time, outside of their normal lives. But morning had a way of bringing reality crashing back. She slipped carefully out of bed, trying not to wake Julian, and padded to the window. The view took her breath away. The lake stretched out below the house, its surface like glass reflecting the soft pink and gold of sunrise. The storm had left everything clean and fresh, with droplets of water still clinging to leaves and grass, catching the light like tiny diamonds. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Natalie turned to find Julian awake, propped up on one elbow, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Stunning," she agreed, moving back toward the bed. I can see why you chose this spot. Julian sat up, running a hand through his sleep-mussed hair. In the morning light, he looked younger somehow, more vulnerable. I designed the house to capture this exact view. Spent months getting the angles right. He paused, his gray eyes finding hers. But it's never looked quite as perfect as it does right now, with you standing in front of it. Natalie felt heat rise in her cheeks. That's quite a line, Mr. Mercer. It's not a line, he said seriously. It's the truth. Natalie, about last night. We should probably talk about that, she interrupted, suddenly nervous. In the light of day, her boldness from the previous night felt reckless. She'd kissed a man she barely knew, shared intimate details of her life, made promises that might have been fueled by storm-induced emotion rather than genuine feeling. Julian stood and crossed to where she was standing, but he kept a careful distance between them. I meant everything I said last night. Every word. But I understand if you're having second thoughts now that the storm has passed. The weight of reality. Natalie looked up at him, seeing the guardedness creeping back into his expression. He was protecting himself, preparing for her to leave, to dismiss what happened between them as a temporary madness brought on by extraordinary circumstances. I'm not having second thoughts about what I feel, she said carefully. I'm having second thoughts about whether it's fair to either of us. Julian, we live completely different lives. You're here in this beautiful isolation, and I'm in the city working 12-hour days building my business. How would this even work? I don't know, Julian admitted. But I know that I haven't felt this alive in years. I know that talking to you last night felt more real than anything I've experienced since I built these walls around myself. And I know that the thought of you walking out that door and never seeing you again makes me feel like I'm suffocating. His honesty stripped away Natalie's defenses. She reached up and touched his face, feeling the slight stubble on his jaw. I feel the same way. But feeling something and making it work in the real world are two very different things. Then let's start small, Julian suggested, catching her hand and holding it against his chest. She could feel his heart beating, steady and strong. Have breakfast with me. Let me show you the rest of the house. And then, if you still want to leave, I'll help you get your car fixed and won't ask you to stay. But give us this morning at least. Natalie found herself nodding before she'd fully thought it through. Okay. This morning. Breakfast and revelations. The kitchen was as stunning as the rest of the house, all clean lines and natural materials. Julian moved through it with easy confidence, preparing eggs and toast while Natalie sat at the island watching him. The domesticity of the scene felt surreal. Yesterday morning she'd been alone in her apartment, focused on the Henderson wedding and getting back to edit photos. Now she was in a billionaire's kitchen, wearing his clothes, wondering if she was making the biggest mistake of her life or the best decision. You're thinking too hard, Julian observed, sliding a plate in front of her. I can practically hear the gears turning. Sorry, Natalie said with a rueful smile. It's what I do. Overthink everything. What are you overthinking right now? She took a bite of eggs, buying herself time. They were perfect, of course. I'm thinking about how this could possibly work. You said you prefer solitude, that you came out here to get away from people. But I'm not a solitary person, Julian. I thrive on connection, on being around others. My work requires me to be social, engaging, constantly interacting with clients and vendors and other photographers. Julian leaned against the counter, his expression thoughtful. You're right. We are very different in that way. But maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe we balance each other. Or maybe we frustrate each other, Natalie countered. Maybe after a few weeks, you'll resent me for disrupting your peace, and I'll resent you for not understanding why I need to be around people. That's possible, Julian conceded. But we won't know unless we try. And Natalie, I'm not suggesting you give up your life or your business. I would never ask that of you. What I'm asking is whether you're willing to explore what this could be. Maybe that means I come into the city more often. Maybe it means you come out here on weekends. Maybe it means we figure out something entirely different that works for both of us. Natalie set down her fork, her appetite suddenly gone. I want to believe that's possible. But I've been burned before by believing in possibilities that turned out to be illusions. So have I, Julian said quietly. He moved around the island to sit beside her, close enough that their knees touched. Victoria taught me that promises can be broken and futures can evaporate overnight. But she also taught me what I don't want. I don't want someone who's only interested in what I can provide. I don't want surface-level connection based on convenience or financial security. I want something real, even if it's messy and complicated and scary. You want that now, Natalie said. But what about in a month? What about when the novelty wears off and you remember why you chose this isolated life in the first place? Julian took her hands in his gray eyes intense. Then I'll deal with it. We'll deal with it together. Natalie, I can't promise you that this will be easy or that we won't hit obstacles. But I can promise you that I won't run at the first sign of difficulty. I won't lie to you or lead you on. And I won't make you feel like you're crazy for trusting me. Tears pricked at Natalie's eyes. Everything he was saying was exactly what she wanted to hear. But years of photographing weddings had taught her that love in the moment and love that lasted were two very different things. She'd seen couples radiantly happy on their wedding day, only to hear months later that they were divorcing. She'd captured moments of perfect joy that turned out to be illusions hiding deep dysfunction. I'm scared, she whispered. I'm scared of believing in this and having it fall apart. I'm scared of appending my life for something that might not last. And I'm scared that if I walk away now, I'll always wonder what we could have been. Julian pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. Natalie buried her face against his chest, breathing in that cedar scent that had become comforting overnight. Being scared means it matters, he murmured against her hair, echoing her words from the night before. It means you're brave enough to acknowledge that this is important. And Natalie, I'm scared too. Terrified, actually. But I'd rather be terrified and try than safe and alone for the rest of my life. They sat like that for a long moment, holding each other while morning light filled the kitchen. Outside, birds sang and the world continued spinning, indifferent to the decision being made in this quiet house by the lake. Finally, Natalie pulled back and looked up at Julian. Show me the rest of the house, she said softly. Show me your world. And then I'll decide. Walking through his life. Julian took her hand and led her through the mansion, and with each room, Natalie saw deeper into who he was. The office with its wall of monitors and complex coding diagrams, evidence of the brilliant mind that had built a software empire. The library filled with books on architecture and design, remnants of the dream he'd abandoned. The art studio that surprised her, filled with half-finished paintings and sketches. I didn't know you painted, she said, examining a canvas that showed the lake at sunset. I don't, really, Julian said, looking almost embarrassed. Just something I do when I need to clear my head. It's not very good. It's beautiful, Natalie disagreed. The painting was raw and emotional, capturing not just the visual beauty of the scene but the feeling of it. Julian, this is incredible. He shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. It's just a hobby. Not like your photography, which is actual art. My photography is technical skill applied to other people's moments, Natalie said. This is pure expression. This is you putting your emotions onto canvas without any filter or client expectations. Don't diminish it. Julian looked at her with an expression that made her breath catch. Do you see what you do? He asked softly. You see the value in things I've dismissed. You see possibilities I've stopped believing in. That's your gift, Natalie. Not just your photography skills. Your ability to see people clearly and reflect back to them their own worth. Natalie felt tears threatening again. Stop making it so hard for me to leave. Then don't leave, Julian said simply. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away the tears that had escaped. Don't leave. Stay with me. Not forever, not right now. Just stay today. And tomorrow we can figure out the next step. And the day after that we'll figure out the one after. We don't have to plan the whole future right this moment. We just have to decide about right now. The leap. Natalie closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of Julian's hands on her face, hearing the sincerity in his voice. Every logical part of her brain was screaming that this was crazy. She'd known this man for less than 12 hours. She had clients waiting, photos to edit, a business to run. She couldn't just abandon her responsibilities for a romance that might burn out as quickly as it ignited. But then she thought about the past 2 years since Thomas left. The careful walls she'd built around her heart. The way she'd thrown herself into work, using her business as both shield and excuse to avoid real connection. The growing emptiness that she'd been ignoring, telling herself she was fine being alone because at least she couldn't be hurt again. She opened her eyes and looked at Julian, really looked at him. She saw someone who was as scared as she was. Someone who'd been hurt and had built his own walls. But he was willing to risk tearing those walls down, willing to be vulnerable, willing to try. I need to make a phone call, she said suddenly. Julian's face fell slightly, and she saw him steel himself for rejection. But Natalie squeezed his hands. I have a client meeting tomorrow afternoon that I absolutely cannot miss. But the rest of my week is relatively clear. So I need to call my assistant and have her reschedule a few things. She took a deep breath. Because you're right. We don't have to figure out forever right now. We just have to figure out today. And I want to spend today with you. And tomorrow. And maybe the rest of this week, if you'll have me. The transformation in Julian's expression was remarkable. The careful guardedness fell away, replaced by pure joy. He pulled her close and kissed her, and Natalie felt something inside her chest loosen and expand. When they broke apart, both breathless, Julian rested his forehead against hers. I'll have you for as long as you're willing to stay. Even when I'm not willing to stay isolated? Natalie teased. Even when I drag you into the city for dinners with friends and gallery openings and all the social things you've been avoiding? Even then, Julian promised. Especially then. Because maybe what I've been avoiding isn't people. Maybe it's just been the risk of caring about them. And you, Natalie Brooks, you've made me remember what it feels like to care. New beginnings. They spent the rest of that morning together, moving between comfortable conversation and comfortable silence. Julian showed Natalie his current software project, explaining the complex coding with patience and enthusiasm that made her see his brilliance clearly. She showed him photos from recent weddings, explaining what she looked for in capturing genuine moments versus staged ones. You see people's real emotions, Julian observed, studying a photo of a bride laughing at something off camera. Not what they want to project, but what they actually feel. That's the goal, Natalie agreed. Anyone can pose people and get technically perfect shots. But I want to capture the moments that matter. The ones people will look back on and remember not just how they looked, but how they felt. Like last night, Julian said softly. When you showed up at my door looking like a drowned cat but with this fierce determination to survive. I wish I had a camera to capture that moment. The moment when my carefully ordered world got turned completely upside down. Natalie laughed, the sound bright and genuine. A drowned cat? That's romantic. An adorable drowned cat, Julian amended, pulling her close. The most beautiful drowned cat I've ever seen. Later, they walked down to the lake together. The storm had left the landscape transformed, everything clean and bright under the afternoon sun. They stood at the water's edge, hands linked, watching ripples spread across the surface. I used to come out here every evening, Julian said quietly. Stand right in this spot and convince myself I was content with my choices. That solitude was enough. And now? Now I know the difference between being alone by choice and being lonely. I was lonely, Natalie. I just didn't want to admit it. He turned to face her. Thank you for that storm. Thank you for breaking down. Thank you for forcing your way into my life and making me realize what I was missing. Natalie reached up and kissed him softly. Thank you for opening your door. Thank you for taking a chance on a stranger. Thank you for being brave enough to try. As the sun moved across the sky, painting the lake in shades of gold and amber, Natalie felt something settle inside her. The fear was still there. The uncertainty about the future hadn't disappeared. But for the first time in 2 years, she felt hope. Real, genuine hope that maybe she could have something authentic and lasting. Her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant confirming the rescheduled appointments. Reality was waiting, but it felt less daunting now. She had a week to explore this connection, to see if what they felt in the intensity of the storm could survive in the light of day. Julian squeezed her hand, and when she looked up at him, she saw her own hope reflected in his gray eyes. "What are you thinking?" he asked. Natalie smiled. "I'm thinking that sometimes the worst storms bring us exactly where we need to be. I'm thinking that maybe taking risks isn't as scary as I thought. And I'm thinking that I'm very glad my car broke down last night." Julian laughed, the sound free and unguarded. "So am I. Though I'm sorry about your car. We should probably arrange to have it towed." "Tomorrow," Natalie said firmly. "We'll deal with practical things tomorrow. Today, I just want to be here with you." "That sounds perfect," Julian agreed. And as they stood together watching the sun set over the lake, both of them scared and hopeful and willing to try, Natalie knew that this was just the beginning. Not the end of a story, but the start of something new. Something real. Something worth fighting for. The storm had passed, but what it left behind was stronger than either of them could have imagined. And maybe that's what love was supposed to be. Not the perfect moments captured in photographs, but the messy, uncertain, beautiful reality of two people choosing each other despite the fear. Natalie had spent years photographing other people's love stories. Now, finally, she was ready to live her own. The end.